Okay, can you hear us?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Elena, for the introduction. So we're going to talk about writing development in a dual language immersion program. I think this presentation is going to go well right after the previous presentation because we're both dealing with the same general population and we're both dealing with the skill of writing. So in our case,
you have the slide below the bottom of the presentation. You see the small arrows. Yeah.
okay. Great. So we are going to be describing a study that took place in an immersion program, and we're going to talk a little bit more in detail about what that immersion looks like in our context. But in general, what we know about immersion context is that they are beneficial in terms of developing language proficiency in general and also academic content. Regarding the effects of writing in immersion programs, the research is somewhat mixed. So there's some research that shows that there is positive writing development in these programs, and then there are some studies that show the opposite, that the skill of writing doesn't develop as much as one would expect.
So what we have in Utah is we have a state program that has 64,000 students, and we have many schools with dual immersion. We have Spanish, Chinese, French, Portuguese, German, and Russian. For the study today, we are going to focus on the Spanish-speaking schools. And we have 142 Spanish-speaking schools, 17 are two-way immersion, 48 are one-way immersion, and 77 are secondary. So what is one-way immersion and two-way immersion? One-way immersion is when students most of the students are English, native English speakers, and they have no proficiency in the L2. And then two-way immersion is when we have at least 1/3 of the students are native speakers of the L2. What we do in our dual immersion program in Utah is we have in the elementary years from first grade to sixth grade, we have half of the day students are taught in English and then half of the day students are taught in Spanish. And here you can see how they divide the subjects. That is grades 1 to 3, and this is grades 4 to 5. Half of the day Spanish, half of the day English, and then they switch, and you can see the subjects. And this is sixth grade. As you can see, like math time gets like bigger, like language gets smaller, so it depends on the grade. And then after sixth grade, students change from having half of the day in Spanish and half of the day in English to having 1 hour a day in Spanish. So the change is very drastic. And some schools have what we call the cultural history and media class that adds another hour in Spanish. So some students go from having half of their day in Spanish to having just 1 hour a day in Spanish, or maybe sometimes 2 hours a day. So the state of Utah has a measure test that gives out to all the students in the dual immersion programs that is called the Apple test. If you are familiar with ACTFL, that is the American Council on the Teaching of Foreign Languages, the Apple was designed by ACTFL, and it's an assessment of performance toward proficiency in the languages. And what we do for our research and for all the students in dual immersion is in grade 3, grade 5, and grade 7, we test their speaking, and then grade 4, grade 6, grade 8, and grade 9, we test listening, reading, and writing. And what we are going to use today for our study is just grade 4, grade 6, grade 7, and 8, and the writing is what we are going to focus our study on.
So the Apple test, as Lucia just mentioned, is the assessment that is used by the state of Utah to measure language development in the dual immersion programs. And all the students in these programs are tested every year, somewhere around November. The Apple test, as we just said, is based on the ACTFL scale of proficiency. ACTFL is the American Council of Teaching and Foreign Languages, and this is the CEFR equivalent on the other side of the Atlantic. And ACTFL distinguishes 4 major levels of proficiency: novice, intermediate, advanced, and superior. Because this test, the Apple test, is assigned for school children, it doesn't go up all the way to the superior level, and it mostly tests the novice and intermediate levels, but it also goes up to the baseline advanced, to the lowest level of the advanced level. So the Apple scores are the ones that you have in the second column in front of you. And as you can see, there are 4 sublevels at the novice level, and 1, 2, and 3, 5 sublevels at the intermediate level, I, 2, 3, 4, and 5, and then 1 level at the advanced level. Again, that's the baseline advanced. And the next column shows a rough correspondence between these scores and the CEFR scale. And finally, on the right, you have the conversion that we used for our study for purposes of statistical analysis and calculations. We converted the Apple scores to numerical scores. So we scored them from 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest level and 10 being the highest level that this test will return. So for this study, what we wanted to do was we wanted to look at writing development in this immersion program, looking at students in 4th, 6th, 8th, and 9th grade. And we have 3 research questions. First of all, we wanted to see if writing does develop from 4th to 6th, 6th to 8th, and 8th to 9th grade. Second, we wanted to see exactly what that development looks like, particularly when comparing 4th grade and 6th grade. And finally, we wanted to see if lexical and syntactic complexity in the writing continues to develop at the higher levels. So for the first question, what we did was a cross-sectional analysis of the writing scores of all students enrolled in 4th grade, 6th grade, 8th grade, and 9th grade during the 1920 academic year. There were over 6,000 students enrolled in those 4 grades. We chose to analyze that year because that was the last year before the pandemic. Students are tested in November, so this was November right before the pandemic hit. And we thought this would be a year that would be indicative of a normal year, of normal learning that happens in the program. So I'll give you a quick overview of the result. As you can see here, the blue bar is 4th grade, and you see that the majority of the students test between a 3 and a 5, with the average score being 4.4. There's a significant jump between 4th and 6th grade. In 6th grade, the majority of them are between 5 and 8, with the average score being a 7.2. It goes to a 7.9 in 8th grade and slightly over 8 in 9th grade. So as you can see, there's a significant amount of development from 4th to 6th grade and from 6th to 8th, and much less when you get to the higher levels between 8th and 9th grade. It's almost flat. So looking at that, quick overview, we see that in grade 4, the most common score is a 4. Grade 6, it goes to a 7. Grade 8 to an 8. And grade 9, again, 8. Those are the most common scores. And again, the rough equivalence in the CEFR scale. The statistical analysis showed that there is a significant effect of grade level in all 4 grades. And in fact, 45% of the variance in writing proficiency is explained by the grade level in which the students are enrolled. So there is a significant difference between 4th graders and 6th graders, 6 and 8, 8 and 9. All pairwise comparisons were significant. So all the differences between grades were statistically significant. What we wanted to do then was, because the main growth happens between 4th and 6th grade, we wanted to understand what that development looks like. So we did a longitudinal analysis comparing 4th graders and 6th graders. And this is how we did it. We identified all the students who in 4th grade received a score of 4 and then were tested 2 years later and received a score of 7. Remember, those are the most common scores in 4th grade and 6th grade. So we took a sample of students who represented the most common level of proficiency in 4th grade and 6th grade. There were a total of 216 students who fell under those criteria, and we randomly selected 25 students. And we did a deeper analysis of their writing, the characteristics of their writing. We looked at their lexical and syntactic complexity. And we looked specifically, when we measured lexical diversity, we used the measure of text lexical diversity, or MTLD. And when we look at syntactic complexity, we looked at 2 types of measures, large grain and fine grain. So clausal complexity and phrasal complexity. And we did all the analyses using an online open source analysis tool called multi-answer test. And this is an overview of the, well, let me first give you a little bit of context. This is what we know about lexical and syntactic complexity. We know that as we go higher in grade level, the students tend to produce more. So when you look at writing in terms of length-based measures, they increase as the grades increase. So 6th graders write more than 4th graders. They write longer sentences. They typically produce more paragraphs. They write longer words. We also know that when you look more in detail at the quality of the writing, the complexity of their syntax develops in 3 stages. At the lower levels, beginners tend to complexify their writing by coordination. Intermediates and subordination. And at the advanced level, you have phrasal elaboration. So here's an example of how that happens. At the beginning level, a beginner would say, I have a son, he's 8 years old, and he plays tennis. An intermediate learner would complexify that sentence by saying, I have a son who's 8 years old and plays tennis. And an advanced learner would say, my 8-year-old son plays tennis. So as you can see, at the lower level, there's a lot of coordination. At the intermediate level, you add subordination. At the advanced level, you add more phrasal complexity. So that implies a competitive relationship between the phrasal level and the clausal level and how they evolve. And we wanted to look at that. So here's a quick overview of what we saw. Looking at length-based measures, as I mentioned earlier, they all increase from 4th grade to 6th grade. But if you look at the very right column, you see the significance level. The only significant difference is in terms of the total number of words that they produce. There's a significant difference between 6th grade and 4th grade. 6th graders produce a lot more language. They write longer sentences, they write more paragraphs, their words are longer, but the differences are not significant. When we looked more deeply at complexity, we saw that phrasal complexity is where the main difference is between 4th graders and 6th graders. Again, if you look at the right level of significance, that's where the significant differences are in phrasal complexity. There are differences in clausal complexity and lexical diversity, but they're not as significant as phrasal complexity. So to summarize, there is an increase in clausal complexity between 4th and 6th grade, but the main difference is at the phrasal level, particularly when it comes to left embeddedness and modifiers per net phrase. There's no significant difference in lexical diversity, and the other interesting finding that we're not talking too much about today is that there's a high degree of variability across different learners. So different learners have different profiles, and some complexify their writing in some ways, others in different ways. So it's difficult to establish a common profile for these learners. So finally, for the final research question, we wanted to look at the higher levels. You will remember that in the first graph that we showed you, when you get to 8th and 9th grade, it seems to plateau. The development seems to slow down, flatten out. There may be a couple of reasons for that. It may be due to the nature of language proficiency. As you go higher in proficiency, it takes longer to go from one level to the next. It may also be a factor of the particular test that we use, because as I explained, the highest level is a 10, and we had a lot of students in 8th grade that already achieved a 10, so there's no more room for them to grow in terms of the score in the test. So we wanted to look at the writing, 8th grade and 9th grade, and see if, even though the test doesn't show growth, is there any growth? So we selected a random sample of 25 students from a group of students that were tested in 8th grade and got the maximum score, and tested again in 9th grade and got the maximum score. We took a sample of 25 students and studied the writing again, and very quickly, what we found was that, again, in terms of length-based measures, there's a general increase in every way. Lexical diversity increases significantly, which didn't happen between 4th and 6th grade. It does happen at the higher levels. Lexical diversity is a significant difference. And there were several measures of complexity, that syntactic complexity, that also increased. For example, modified pronoun phrase, subordinate clauses. Others, however, decreased. Left embeddedness, for example. The most important difference between these two levels, so once you get to the higher level, what distinguishes writers is the use of cohesive devices and connectives. For example, the use of causal and temporal and conditional connectives is a big difference between 8th and 9th graders. So in conclusion, to summarize the three questions, we looked at writing proficiency in a Spanish immersion program, and we saw that it increases significantly between 4th, 6th, and 8th grade, although that level of development seems to slow down at the top. And we saw that measures of lexical and syntactic complexity increase between 4th and 6th, but the main difference is the development of syntactic complexity at the phrasal level. And I apologize, it says clausal there, it should say phrasal level. And finally, when looking at the higher levels, 8th and 9th grade, we saw that complexity continues to increase, but the changes are most significant in terms of referential, cohesion, and connectedness. Thank you so much. Let us know if there are any questions.
You are now unmuted.